Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the AI for Good Global Summit, all year, always online. I hope that you, your families, your colleagues, your friends are staying healthy and safe. My name is Ahmed Jiyad from the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, and I have the privilege of introducing this session today. The ITU is the United Nations Specialized Agency for ICTs, and we are also the organizers of the AI for Good Global Summit, alongside with XPRIZE Foundation, 37 United Nations Organization, ACM, and co-convened by Switzerland. The goal of the AI for Good Global Summit is to identify practical applications of artificial intelligence that can advance sustainable development goals and to scale those solutions to a global impact. Now, like most of the world, the AI for Good Summit has gone digital. So we're moving forward with a weekly online programming that allows us to reach even more people throughout the year. The heart of the summit has always been organized around the breakthrough tracks that aim to connect the AI innovators and problem owners to create AI for good projects. And this year is no exception. So this year we're moving forward with presenting a series of all-star keynote, interactive breakthrough sessions, key projects, project presentations, key announcements, and we're counting on your active participation to take those forward. And before I start today's web moderator, I would like to start with some housekeeping rules. Your microphone has been disabled, so please use the Q&A and the chat function to communicate. And the moderator would be identifying some of your questions and read them to our speakers today. And we're really counting on your active participation to make this a very interactive session. And speaking of being interactive, we have the first challenge for you. I would like to ask every one of you to use the chat function right now and type in where they're connected from, which city or country. And I start with myself. So I'm connecting today from Geneva. I can see the chat is running so fast right now. People from Brussels, Buenos Aires, Rome, Alexandria, Montreal, Cambridge, Lausanne, everywhere. Well, that's a global audience for a global summit. So I think without further ado, now it's time to introduce our moderator today, Amir Ben Fatimi, who is the Chief Innovation Officer of XPRIZE and the chair of the AI for Good Global Summit program. And he's been the one supporting us in putting together this breakthrough tracks for the last 4 years and the summit program. Amir, please, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. It's a great pleasure, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today is the second day of the breakthrough announcement, and we're going to be starting with an important keynote and conversation that I'm going to be announcing soon. In the past few days, we have had the pleasure and the luck to have major keynotes, and we hope that we had the chance to attend some of them, if not all of them. So today is my pleasure to welcome again Yoshua Bengio, a friend and also a recognized leader in the world of AI and pioneer in deep learning. Joshua is joined with Gabriel Kotsis, who is the president of ACM, the Association of Computer Machinery, and she's also a full professor of computer science at Johannes Kepler University in Linz, Austria, leading the Department of Telecommunication and Division of Corporate Information System. She has had scientific contribution, including similar work in the field of workload characterization for parallel and distributed systems and performance management of computer systems. She has organized ACM conferences and workshops, and in 2016 received an award for her accomplishment with the ACM Women in Courage conference series. She is a founding member of ACM Europe Council, and she became in 2014 an ACM distinguished member. And again, she is now currently the president of ACM. So Gabriel is joining us to have a conversation and dialogue with Yoshua Bengio. And Yoshua, we had the pleasure to have you before last week and talking about the opportunities of collaboration in using AI and machine learning to combat COVID and global pandemics and to use AI for the benefit of society. Today, we'd like to invite you again to join us to talk about the opportunity of AI for the common good and how can we chart a future and roadmap in using AI for social good. So with great pleasure, I invite you, Joshua, to start with a short keynote, and then we'll invite, and by the way, Gabriel, you're invited to join us as well to have a conversation, dialogue, and some questions to Yoshua about the same topic, and probably we'll close with some Q&A from the audience. without further ado, Yoshua, welcome.
Hi. Thank you, Amir. Let me share my screen. So I will try to brainstorm with you about where, directions for the future of AI for social good, and what are some of the challenges that I see for really bringing AI to the benefit of everyone. So AI is a powerful tool. We are very far from human level AI, but still AI can be extremely useful. We have to not forget that it's a tool, and tools can be used positively, bring social value, or they could be used by a few to increase their wealth or their power. And so one of the important questions we need to ask is, how do we set up the incentives for AI to move us in a better direction for society? And where do the current incentive systems lead us? Because I think there may be some concerns that are growing as AI is becoming more and more powerful. In particular, it can be used by those already in power to concentrate even more power, which is essentially going against our ideals of democracy. Which means somehow we need to find ways that those tools can be governed by our collective needs, whether it's within each country or internationally. So I don't need for this audience to tell you about all the positive potential of AI, whether it's in medicine, environment, education, justice, humanitarian applications. What I want to focus on today are some of the things we could maybe think about together to maybe steer a little bit the incentive system for our planet to make AI used for the better good of humanity. And I'm going to talk about mostly 3 topics briefly during this keynote. One is very close to Amir's heart and has to do with how we can do a better job internationally to coordinate AI for social good projects. So because of this venue, this conference is really about the international community and what we can do. I think it's good to ask how we can do a better job at bringing the expertise from many different parts in the world, the domain expertise and funding and so on. Then I'm going to consider a particular area of application of AI, which is drug discovery, something which is currently done mostly in large pharmaceutical companies, but researchers in academia have been contributing a lot of ideas. And I'm gonna ask questions about how AI and computers in general might change the way that we could do drug discovery in the future, but that maybe there are obstacles to doing this optimally because of the incentives, the current incentive systems, which favor secrecy instead of sharing data and knowledge, which if we did could reduce the cost of medical innovation. So I'm going to speak towards a proposal, or at least thinking about a proposal that could enable countries which want to work together on this to share the cost of public domain drug discovery. And I'll say a few words as well about something that's more on the normative side, right? The first 2 topics are really about what we can actually do that's concrete to bring good with AI. And then the third item I want to talk about is how do we change our rules of the game? How do we change our laws? How do we change our international norms to minimize the negatives that may come from advertising paid for manipulation, maybe in social media, things like killer robots, discrimination, and so on, which we know there's a lot of discussion around regarding the applications of AI. Okay, so let's go into the first topic. Amir and others have set up this organization, and there are other groups around the world that are pushing in the same direction, where I think really it would help if a number of nations got together to coordinate these efforts for AI for social good projects. And the reason for this is you have people with different pieces of the puzzle sitting in different places in the world. And somehow we need to find the good ways of bringing them together. The people in the NGOs or governments in developing countries that know about problems, they know what matters, but they may not have the expertise, or they may not have the funding. And then, there are, I know grad students in universities want to help, but they know nothing about these problems. They might work on something thinking it could be useful, but if it's not connected to the problem owners, it's probably going to be a waste of time, and it might be a paper, but it's not going to really help people. And so it's really important that we work harder, and this whole conference, I think, is aiming at that, at making sure that the R&D development efforts of AI are better connected with the needs. And of course, we can also help making sure that what is done is going to be deployed in a way that works. So there is the funding aspect, but also you want to make sure that it's going to be deployed in a way that's going to help the actual people who need that help. And so the idea of AI Commons is to construct a sort of clearinghouse to help people figure out with their expertise, where can I contribute, and to help them prioritize where, projects and, that need, where their expertise, where they can bring is going to be most valuable. Let me move on to my second topic. So this one is a bit more complicated. And in a way, you can think of it as trying to consider a special area of the application of AI, which I got involved in, as I discussed in my last presentation on the 24th, because of COVID. And it made me realize that maybe we have an alignment problem. And I'm sure this is not a new thing. People have been discussing this in books like Big Pharma, Bad Pharma, and so on. An alignment problem between the public good, saving as many lives as possible, and the current incentive system in the pharmaceutical industry. And what's making this maybe a bigger issue today is we are at a transition phase from a technological point of view, whereas drug development and discovery was mostly done in the heads of chemists and biologists and so on, to a mode which is going to be more and more driven by data, right? And AI and physics simulators, so software essentially. So this is really different in fundamental ways. And in particular, that for AI systems to be successful, they need a lot of data. So right now there's about 10 large pharmaceutical companies. So if each of them were contributing some amount of data to solving particular problems, and they do it right now secretly, we might have a lot of redundancy and lost opportunity for bringing all of those pieces of information together in machine learning methods to really speed up and reduce the cost of drug development. Unfortunately, the current incentive system goes completely against that, right? If you're working in one of those companies, if you're one of the executives of one of those companies, it's clear that you want to keep your information secret, because otherwise your really large capital investment is going to potentially be wasted, as other companies might take your information and make money with it and bypass your sources of revenue that should be compensating for the investment you made in research. So in that, I mean, pharma companies are sharing some data, but they usually don't share the most important data exactly for those reasons. And in that secrecy environment is even invading the academic research world, because if you're a PhD student and you find something interesting in your research that could lead to a drug in the future, you might not want to share that information as you would normally as an academic, because you would think, oh, I could maybe start a company to commercialize this thing, or I could sell it to a company that would do it. Either way, the current incentive system is really slowing down the rate of progress. And because we're talking about drugs that can save lives, it also means people are going to be dying under a different incentive system, they could be alive. So what could we do? I mean, one option is to just throw your hands up and say, well, that's life. That's how we are organized in our society, and what can we do? But I think it's worth thinking about options, and I think we have some models that we could potentially expand on in order to explore potentially better social organization for drug development. And the inspiration and model that I'm suggesting we look at is how academic research is being funded and incentivized. So in general, academics will be rewarded not by some profits made by their work, but by getting recognition for their work. And that recognition comes from what? From sharing the knowledge they're acquiring. So another interesting aspect of academic labs is they're at the same time competing with each other for funding and collaborating, because of course the knowledge they're building up is found by incrementally on top of the knowledge that has already been shared by others. So that's an interesting model, but how could we turn something like this into a pipeline that can do much more applied stuff, which is to discover new drugs? So what I'm suggesting is to create gradually a funding model for R&D in drug discovery, which would share a lot of the attributes of academic research funding, but with strong constraints on sharing, of course, even stronger than currently is in academia. Making sure that the resulting drugs are going to be free for poor countries, for example, and cheap for participating countries, to create an incentive for countries to join in the cost of these developments. And as a first step, I think what we could do is fund an international effort at data collection, which is the blood for AI here, a data collection pipeline for chemical and biological assays to provide a benchmark for machine learning researchers who want to join the drug discovery R&D effort. And so this is motivated by the idea that the cost of acquiring that knowledge is fixed. But once we have that knowledge, like 99% of the cost of drugs is really finding those drugs. Once you have the chemical formula, actually building those, fabricating those drugs is almost free in comparison. So the usual market incentives may not be appropriate here, in addition to the fact that people are willing to pay almost any price if it's going to save their life, which again distorts the market system. So we need to think of a way that it will be profitable for countries to join a club like this, and simply because the cost of the R&D is like a constant, but the benefits of joining, which is having those drugs for very cheap, could be shared easily. So that's my second bullet. Now, let me go quickly on the third item regarding advertising and psychological manipulation. If you haven't seen the movie The Social Dilemma, I encourage you to see it. It's a bit of a dramatization of reality. I mean, AI is not like what they show, but I think it raises really important questions about not just the moral issue of psychological manipulation for someone else's benefit, but also how it may hurt our societies, especially democracy and individuals who become addicted to their phones. I think one thing that nobody talks about, and I'd like to raise here, is that it's not even clear that the advertising-funded system is good for capitalism. And the reason is that it favors large incumbents rather than the small companies and startups which want to pierce in a particular area, and thus actually slows innovation rather than accelerating it. Now, from a game theory point of view, the problem is if for any of the actors in the current system, like if you're a company, you have to put aside a part of your budget for advertising. Otherwise, you're going to be a loser compared to the ones which do, because advertising works. It does make people, act differently. But it's just because we haven't set the rules of the game, again, the incentive system, in a way that favors society. And so I think we have to rethink, maybe, for example, by thinking of social networks and search engines potentially as public services, or potentially other models where we regulate sufficiently those companies so that we avoid the kind of paid-for influence which can hurt either individual users or society. So I'm asking those questions. I don't have the answers, but I really think that we ought to think about those questions, but also think out of the box. Think that, okay, the world isn't frozen in the way that it currently is, that we might think of a different social and economic organization, at least in these areas that I've talked about, which would benefit more the public. And if we don't do that, I think as AI becomes more powerful, we really run into dangers that are going to grow. One way to think about it is we're building very powerful technology. And eventually anybody can grab that technology and use it in a way that could be dangerous for a lot of other people. It's like if everyone could just throw off a major nuclear weapon, that wouldn't be good, right? So as software becomes easier to use and more powerful, I think we need to rethink the way that our societies are organized to avoid longer term catastrophes. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Joshua. I would like to invite Gabriel Kotsis, President of ACM, to join us now to have a dialogue with Joshua. Gabriel, welcome.
Yes, thank you very much, Amir, and thank you, Joshua, for your very inspiring talk. I would like to start asking you, you said that artificial intelligence has to be seen as a tool, and that this tool should be used for the collective needs and for the collective benefits. To what extent would you think that the people, the normal people, so to say, also understand those kind of tools? How much knowledge would they need?
Well, clearly, currently, most citizens don't understand enough those tools in order to be good citizens, which means participate in democracy and collective decision-making in a direction that's the best one for their society. And so we have a big job to do in terms of education. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't mean that ordinary citizens need to understand the math behind or be able to program these things themselves. But although it would be a good thing, I think what is more important is that they understand the social consequences, and that they understand that it's not magic, that they understand what are the limitations. For example, in this talk, I didn't talk about killer robots, but this is something I talk about a lot. And one thing that people need to understand is that current AI and for foreseeable future, it is not going to understand social concerns, moral values, whereas a human being could. And so, if you're pressing the trigger of the gun, even if you receive an order to kill, you might decide not to do it. But a machine will just happily do it. Well, happily is not the right word here. We'll just do it, period, without having any understanding of the consequences. So that education, I think you're right, is something that we need to do better. And hopefully the conferences like the one we are in today are also going to help. But I also think that even the experts don't have the right education. So if you're a computer scientist, you learn a lot about programming and math and so on, but you don't learn that much about society, about social impact, about ethics. And this is dearly lacking in our education in this field.
Mm-hmm. So this also calls for more collaboration across the various disciplines, I would assume.
Yeah, actually, that was the theme of the conference I gave a few days ago here. As soon as you try to apply AI, and of course, AI for social good is mostly an application of AI. If you want to do it right, you have to be in a mode of collaboration. You have to be in a mode of humility where you realize you only know a little part of the puzzle, and there are these other people who know much more than you do. And so you really have to listen to them. You have to also be pedagogical to explain your stuff, and find the right way of combining your strengths.
Mm-hmm. At that point, I would like to bring in one of the questions that seems appropriate now that appeared in the question and answer section, namely, there is a quote that we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. What do you think in the context of AI? To what extent would also AI influence us as a tool?
Yeah, I mean, this is the theme of the Social Dilemma movie. But I think we have to be careful here not to fall into the idea that like the programmers, the engineers, or the scientists who build those things, they're not responsible because, it's the AI that did it. No, those systems are tools. They've been, designed and built by humans. Now, it may be that those humans didn't foresee the consequences of the use of those tools. But they're still responsible to do their best to take that into consideration. So there's a notion of responsibility here, which we need to pay attention to. And so it's the way that we design those systems, the way that we deploy them, where, and then for what purpose, and who's going to benefit or who's going to be hurt, that we need to pay a lot more attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, talking about responsibility, as you mentioned, all AI methods rely on data.
Yeah.
So we also have a big responsibility with respect to data. And we also, I think, have to really create awareness among the people again about what kind of data they provide, they should provide, they could provide. And also the question you mentioned, the democratic principle on who owns the data. Do you have any vision on how we should proceed in that direction?
I certainly have some thoughts about it. So yeah, people need to understand that data is valuable because it can be used by AI. Now, it could be used against them, and that's something citizens and users of these products need to understand. It can also be used in their favor. So last week I talked about the use of data for building epidemiological models of COVID-19. So in medical data in general, the data could be used in both directions. It could be used to help design better treatments. it could also potentially be used against yourself. Like maybe insurance companies might want to use that information to charge you more or something like this because you're at higher risk. So we need to have better, again, socioeconomic tools to manage the potential benefit and the potential harms of sharing data. And one direction that I'm really fond of is the idea of a data trust. So you see right now, when you share your data with a software company or a social network or a search engine or whatever, recommendation system, you have essentially, if you want to use those services and be part of society, you have to agree that they do what they want to do with the data. And you don't have negotiating power as a one person out of billions to dictate the terms of how the data should be used. But the idea of data trust is to create a third party that's going to be powerful enough, because it represents millions of people, to negotiate with those companies the terms by which the data should be used and not used. So think of it like financial trust creates a separation between the people who put in money and the way that the money is invested. So here, as a user, I may choose a data trust whose goals are aligned with mine. I want to make sure that this data is used for the well-being of humanity and not used against me, for example. But I need to be represented by these organizations to deal on behalf of all the people who are sharing their data. But it's not going to happen by itself, right? It's going to require, again, governments to mandate these, essentially force the organizations that you take your data to go through those third parties. You could have a market for data trust, but you need government regulation to make sure that there is this separation between the people who provide the data and those who can take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, trust, of course, is one dimension and one element where we would need governmental regulation. The other aspect is, as you said, data are valuable. So it's really a good, and is it something that can be sold? You gave your example of the new economy for the drug market, where the institutions would have a different incentive in sharing their data. But it could also be the case that the incentive is very straightforward, just making quick money. This holds for organizations. This could also hold for individuals. Individuals might want to sell their data because they need money urgently, like they're selling other items that they currently possess or have. This could be also very risky. Do you think that also governmental regulations should somehow shape this data market from an economic perspective, from an
yeah, absolutely. I think data trust could help with that in part. People have to understand that data is not like ordinary goods. For the same reason I was talking about in my presentation, that once you have data in your hand, you can share it. I mean, you can sell it 1,000 times for essentially free. And so what happens is that companies will be incentivized to keep that data behind closed walls, or find mechanisms to prevent people from stealing that data, but it's very difficult. So I think our economic system right now isn't well structured for managing the value of data and making sure that we get the positive value out of it that we could.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to your vision, I would like to say, of your new economic model, not only for drug discovery, but maybe also for other kinds of things. How realistic is it, given the diverse interest actually of the many different players? There was, for example, one question about what kind of role could an individual PhD student play in this consortium, which is of course very different than the role of a big pharma industry.
Right.
And especially the pharma industry seems to have a tendency of rather closing their knowledge and not really willing to share. I'm not sure if this academically driven incentive model of sharing and benefiting would truly be successful. How can we promote this? How can we support this better?
Well, so first of all, we have to show that it works. And it's probably not going to be promoted by pharma, although they could benefit from it to some extent. The pharmaceutical companies are already subcontracting a lot of the research. And so in a way, what I'm saying is, let's make sure that that research part is done in a data and knowledge efficient way by making sure that the information is shared across the actors and making sure that even a small player like a PhD student somewhere in a lab can contribute to that. And I think it's feasible with the right incentive systems. And these incentives could be created fairly easily if a few countries would put the capital necessary to generate that initial data pipeline. So I think it's quite feasible. I think that the obstacles are more political. I can imagine some companies wanting to fight things like this, or I can imagine countries which have large pharma to be concerned about their industry. But really what I'm proposing is something that's, for starters, is really just about helping academia do a better job of contributing to drug development. Right now, academics can't do much because they're isolated in each of their labs. There's no global coordination, and they don't have the capital for generating the kind of data that would be needed for their work to become really effective. But if we can make that drug discovery part more efficient, pharmaceutical companies will be happy to commercialize the results of that research.
One other issue that has been brought up also in the question and answer section that also I wanted to ask you is, we have been talking before about the importance of collaboration across various disciplines, across various domains, but it is of course challenging. We don't speak the same language. Is there any specific advice that you could give on how this could be achieved successfully? Would the common goal be sufficient, or what would be major incentives for actual approaches that could work based on your experience?
Well, so there are many places where we could act to make this better. So one is in education and university education. Right now, there's a focus on training people to become experts at one thing. That's what a PhD is about. But even undergrad studies tend to be converging in some very pointy direction. So that is good. That's how science advances. You become an expert at something. But for your work to become useful in the world, often you need to learn how to collaborate with others, and you need that general knowledge of many areas of society and science in order to do that productively. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I believe as soon as you work on more applied projects, meaning that it's going to be deployed for real in the world, whether you're in a company or in academia, you're facing the issue of collaboration and working with other experts. So it's going to come anyways, but I think if we can just tune a little bit the culture so that people see the positive value of this, be prepared for it, that kind of collaboration is going to work better. And also, as I mentioned in my first point, if we create the communication tools, the collaboration tools, the platforms for collaboration, that's going to facilitate that. We already have a lot of tools for these kinds of things on the web. So I think we are in a direction where we can see much more efficient collaboration in the future, both scientifically and in deploying useful things out there.
Mm-hmm. But one challenge might still remain. You mentioned that researchers mainly benefit from being recognized. So if you have a collaboration, how could you attribute the actual contributions, both from an academic recognition point of view, but also from a very commercial point of view, like who owns
Yeah.
then the IPs of the results that have been found? How can you
Right,
share
right.
the knowledge that has been collected?
This is a great question and a very hard one. And we do need to think harder about it. But here are some thoughts. So first of all, there's already a system that kind of works. It's not perfect in academia for credit assignment. The authors form a small group and they try to find a consensus of like author order and stuff like that. Also, we have a system of attributing credit through funding, right? So, and it's not perfect. There are lots of issues, lots of cases where people feel they have been, someone else is getting the credit where they should have. But overall, it's working reasonably well. And it works through a sort of consensus, for example, on grant committees. It works through how the community chooses to cite. So citations, for example, in the scientific community have become a very imperfect way of measuring how much credit is due to different contributions. And so it's not like we have the magic bullet, but we already know some things that work reasonably well. And a lot of these things are connected to recognition. But that means if we go for the kind of public domain organization that I'm talking about, a lot of the work is going to be about this credit assignment aspect of it. Like we need, it's like, journals, right? Most of the work is in reviewing and then discussing between the authors and the reviewers and between the reviewers, or in conferences, the same thing, to find out, what's the value or the relative value of different contributions. So we don't have perfect solutions, but we do have expertise on how to do those things, and I think we can apply that expertise and probably improve it. And one part of my proposal that I didn't have time to talk about is that entities that would get the funding that I'm talking about would not just get like the usual grant funding in academia just pays for the costs, right? There's no notion of profit. But like here, if we want to extend this to non-academic entities like startups, which I think would be great, and also to incentivize academics to stay in academia and do research rather than go to industry, in addition to funding the costs, we could fund the we could provide sort of rewards for the most successful contribution. So this credit assignment problem you're talking about, it's not just useful to decide who gets the grant for this or for that piece of the puzzle, but also that those organizations or those people that have contributed significantly to something that ends up being really useful for society also get some extra reward. So it's kind of we're playing the role of profit. And I think that would be an extra motivation that would help to keep some people, at least, that are, for example, the kind of people who start companies, to work on these public good projects rather than go to the for-profit type of projects.
Yeah, I agree. And this was also one of the questions in the chat, which fits in now nicely. You said that it's an incentive for the researchers if they see that their research work is also applicable and in a beneficial way. But we also see now with AI, and we have seen it in the past with other kind of technologies, that there's also misuse, unethical use as it was not intended by the researcher. Do you think that there is a risk if we don't stop this unethical and incorrect usage quickly, that the researchers will stop their research and will think, no, it's a bad technology, let's stay away from that?
Maybe. Yeah, it could go in this direction. Hopefully we can put in place better governance tools, better social norms, better regulations to at least make sure that the positives outweigh the negatives. I think right now the positives do outweigh the negatives, but there are a lot of concerns, rightfully so. So it's really important, the governance aspect of AI and technology in general. Any powerful tool needs to be properly managed from a social norms perspective. Otherwise, the pure self-interest incentive is almost automatically leads to abuse.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned in your talk that we need norms, international norms against misuse, specifically, for example, manipulation.
Yeah.
Do we already have the mechanisms of detecting it early enough? I mean, the norms are one thing, but the other thing is also you have to detect it, you have to notice.
I mean, it would be nice. I think it'd be nice to do, and there are already research projects in that direction. I don't think we're anywhere close to having those kinds of solutions, but I don't think we need them. I think human beings are quite able to know if, say, some ad or some social network kind of operation is really trying to manipulate you. So what we do need are rules and regulations that penalize those entities that are doing it, and then we'll find. I mean, there will be humans who think of it like judges, auditors, and things like that, who will play the role of implementing the principles that democratic societies will want to see respected in those instances.
But I would say we really have to act quickly, because otherwise we run the risk that we lose our ability to detect such cases. If they're becoming more and more popular, we might get used to it. We might think, well, this is now the normal way, like we get our news. There is always this bias. We can't escape anymore. So if we don't really act now, there might be the danger of.
I agree.
Late.
Yeah, this is a serious issue, and I think it's even worse than what you're saying, in the sense that those tools are being used to distort the democratic system, and if the powers that control those tools also control our democracies, well, I think we might be done. Think about like Big Brother scenario, right? It becomes very hard to undo the Big Brother scenario, because the organization that is manipulating your minds is also controlling society in general, and not making it easy for the democratic will to actually express itself and even know that there is a problem.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any suggestion about what we as researchers immediately can do?
Yes, we can participate in these kinds of conferences, but more importantly, I think we are trusted voices in our societies. We have the ear of governments, at least in some countries. We have the ear of the media. So I think we should play our role as citizens, but also citizens that can have a voice. And that means we also have a responsibility to be part of these debates, part of these collective discussions.
Mm-hmm. There was also the specific question, if we engage in conferences like this, a very practical question: how could one who is interested in join the AI for Commons?
I think if you go on the website, you can join.
Okay, there is an opportunity to do so. Let's also talk a little bit now about your perspective, more from a data science perspective. You mentioned that those projects also benefit from data from different sources.
Yes.
From a technical point of view, this is also quite challenging, because even if people are willing to share their data, it's not so easy, because they come in different flavor with different interpretations. How, from a technical point of view, can we really manage such a collective, collaborative cooperation, for example, in the field of drug discovery?
Yeah, this is a good question. I do think the major obstacles are social and political rather than technical. But you're right, there are technical issues when you mix different sources of data. In fact, it's one of the most interesting recent research directions in machine learning is, under different names, but you can call it out of distribution generalization or transfer learning, or things like that. So the idea is, I may see some data from a particular distribution, or maybe I see some different distributions, like different sources of data, but then I'm going to deploy it or adapt it with very little data from a different distribution. How do I make sure that I'm going to learn in a way that I can deal with those different data sources? They're different because maybe they're collected in a different country using different machines, or people are not always reliable and exactly the same way. So that's one aspect. I think there's a lot of interesting research going on in machine learning, so we're going to make progress on that. Another aspect is, if we build the kinds of international organizations that I've been talking about, then we can create standards, right? It's going to be much easier if the way that we collect data, for example, assays, chemical assays, biological assays, in the case of drug discovery, but in the medical field in general, every country, or even in Canada, every province has their own standards. It's a huge mess, right? So I think really we have something to gain to agree on some sort of standards internationally. And medicine has created a lot of standards for naming things in a way that allows doctors from around the world to understand each other. So I think we can do it. It's an effort, but it's going to help a lot. Just the way that we collect data can be more rational, more standardized across the planet.
Mm. And as you mentioned, another challenge would also be legal aspects. If you combine data from different sources, they might come from different nations with different regulations with respect to security and privacy. So if you define, for example, a technical standard for the data integration, it might not be possible that all would adhere to that, because privacy, security rights might be.
So you need legal standards as well.
Mm-hmm.
And those legal standards, I mean, they're going to evolve, because right now we're at the beginning of a data era. And so we shouldn't think that it's all frozen. We have an opportunity to build those standards, whether they're the technical standards, the legal standards, and it's going to be mutually beneficial, right? So if you're a government in a country and you see a standard being developed around the world for, say, a particular kind of medical data, then there is an incentive to join this standard, because it's going to make it easier for you to benefit from the data from these other countries and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. There was another interesting comment that we might also try to use AI for monitoring and controlling our activities with that respect. So in order to make sure that our AI is used in an ethical way, we can again use AI to detect possible frauds.
I think there's some potential for that. I mean, there's already a lot of work on trying to do fraud detection, fake news detection. So, but we're still in the beginnings of that. And one reason why it's difficult is because we are very far from having machines which actually understand even how the world works around us and society works, even at the level of a child or something. So it's challenging. But I think we should continue doing that kind of research. And there is, in the long run, I think there's a huge potential for AI to help us create stronger democracies, where the collective discussion that should drive collective decisions are going to be more rational, more inclusive, and less polluted by demagogy, which is essentially what is going on right now in the way that we do politics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's important that we not only look at the result at the end, but we really try to govern and define the whole process and define standards for the whole process of collaboration. Yeah. Well, our discussion is coming to an end, and maybe I would like to hand over now again to Amir to summarize and round up our session.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. Very interesting questions, and definitely needed. As both you and Yoshua talk about democracy and basically providing mechanisms for collaboration and data sharing and data trust and support for good, I would like to ask each of you one question. And that question is a little bit higher level, but I think it would be interesting for the audience to have a synopsis of how you think about this. If, according to what your thesis was, Yoshua, we think about AI as a force for good or a public good, what would be one single things we have to do today to make sure we're on the roadmap to make AI becoming a public good? And what question for you as well, Gabrielle? Because from your vantage point, your research effort, ACM, and seeing all the things that you see, how can we basically put the first foundation to make sure that we are solidly grounded to get there?
Yeah, if I may start, I think also what we as ACM, as organization, could do is mostly on the line of creating awareness, and not only among researchers, as we have discussed before, but really awareness in the public. We need to tell the people, and I pretty much support Joshua's point of view, that AI is not magic, it's not a danger, it's simply a tool that we as humankind will be able to master. And so all those horror scenarios of killer robots are not realistic, because we are not going to build those kind of tools. And I truly hope that humankind will be smart enough, will be human intelligently enough not to allow those things to happen. But as we discussed before, this requires a lot of education among the people and a lot of awareness, and that's where we would like to contribute.
Yeah, I think Gabriela's answer is excellent. Nothing's going to happen of consequence if there are not enough people who understand those issues. And right now, the issues that we've been discussing today are not in the minds of most people. They're either considering AI as some like scary science fiction thing, or you know, oh, it's going to solve all our economic problems. So that's essential. I also think that we have a possibility of making small steps towards creating a different style of doing AI R&D and deployment that's more aligned with the common good. And that could be fueled by international collaboration and funding.
Yes, we come back to the topic of funding. And for funding to be effective, we usually need to understand what could be sustainable to get funded by local governments, institutions. So that sustainability maybe comes from this awareness and this collaboration that you talked about, Yoshua, and yourself, Gabrielle, as well. If not everyone can become a machine learning expert or data scientist, how can all of us be more aware and somehow start the process of understanding, but also participating efficiently?
So I think for sustainability of funding, you need to create sufficient examples of success that will make it clear for governments that it is in their financial interest to continue in a direction like this, right? I mean, we can do a little bit of mileage with philanthropy and, you know, people giving their time and so on, and it's great. The open source software kind of ecosystem works just from this, but in other cases, I think we need more. We need global coordination, global social norms, and global funding.
Yeah, I would like to comment on your statement that, of course, not all of us will become AI experts, and it's not necessary. But I think what would be very beneficial for creating awareness would be to highlight and to showcase successful AI projects. And I think this is also something that this platform could do, really promote and make visible the cases where AI is a good tool, is used in a good way. And as I said before, not only show the results at the end, but also show how well the whole process was set up. And this could then act as a role model, a template, a footprint for future projects, and maybe even go into guidelines for funding. If you want to get funding, you need to adhere to those best practices. This is some of my ideas in that direction.
This is wonderful. Thank you very much, I think, for these insights. We have way many questions. We don't have time for that, but we encourage everyone to join the Slack channel to continue the conversation, ask questions. And all of this will be published, recorded and published on the website. Thank you again, Yoshua and Gabriel, for your time and participation, and always insightful and very positive outlook. I would like to invite now for the next part of our program today, Andrew Tohert, who will continue what we started yesterday on the breakthrough result and tracks that we have started a week ago, and to guide us through the presentation of the project that came out of those breakthrough tracks. Andrew?
Thank you, Amir. And as Amir said, I have the pleasure of leading you through the next part of the agenda today, really focusing on those breakthrough tracks. And if you recall, well, I'll start with a bit of a recap for those that weren't on yesterday's session. Today, we're going to hear from 4 of the remaining 4 projects that were the finalists here. The focus of the tracks themselves, if somebody can cue the slides. For those that recall, if you go to the next slide, the tracks really were designed around 3 areas, gender, food, and pandemics. And I'll give you a sense as to how we came up with these areas and some of the guidance that we had gotten from our brain trust to do it. And that's been a bit of a journey here. So the journey started with the definition of these tracks. These tracks are ones that XPRIZE has, particularly in the case of gender and food, XPRIZE has been active around for quite some time. In the case of pandemics, it was very timely given what's going on in the world and the launch of our Pandemic Alliance earlier this year. And so the first thing we did is we recruited a set of brain trusts. You'll get to see who those are momentarily. And they really provided the thought leadership and the guidance as to not just what the tracks are, but more the point within each track, what are some of the most important themes that we could ask the public, the community that's around us to submit projects around. And as we go through these projects, we'll highlight what theme they were submitted under. So the project submissions started a couple months back. We then we're also fortunate to put together a mentor network of industry leaders who could get with each of those projects and help guide them and help scope them and really put them on the roadmap to getting them to this week where we were here this week. We selected 3 finalist teams to be workshopped within each track. So 3 from pandemics, 3 from food, 3 from gender. And that happened over the course of the last week. Many of you on the call participated in that, and we thank you for your participation and for helping those teams really get those projects to the point where they are today. And then, of course, that brings us to yesterday and today, where each of the teams got a chance to showcase their project, have a bit of an ask out to the community here as to how we can make that project more impactful, more successful, so on and so forth. Which brings us, of course, to the presentations today. A bit on the format. We've given so there'll be 4 projects today, 2 in pandemics and 1 in each of food and gender. We have myself, I happen to have the honor of being the facilitator over the pandemics track, and 2 of my colleagues who we'll introduce shortly who ran the other 2 tracks. We'll give each project team a few minutes to present an overview of the project. And then we'll open it up to Q&A for all of you on the call here to ask more about it, to understand how potentially you can get involved, maybe able to help them, so on and so forth. So with that, I'll start us on the pandemic track. The pandemic track, we're going to have two project presentations today. One of them is from Montreal Artificial Intelligence Ethics Institute, and the other one from Intelligent Global Health. Before we get into each of the projects, I do want to have a big thank you for those brain trusts that I mentioned before. So here you can see the brain trust for the pandemic intelligence track, which again, like I said, they provided that thought leadership as to how we both attack the space, as well as helping to refine down to the small number that we got to workshop here, and then also the experts as well, who provided that mentorship towards all of these teams. And I imagine some of them are on the call today as well. So thank you again to those experts. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the team, which was Montreal Artificial Intelligence Ethics Institute. Allison Cohen from that team will be doing the presenting. The project itself was submitted under the theme of how can we incentivize data collection and sharing to help build solutions that are equitable and fair when it comes to responses to communities affected by pandemics such as COVID-19. Of course, Allison will guide us through the presentation, but it is a team effort. I do want to also honor her team members, which is Alexandrine Royer and Abhishek Gupta, which were also, of course, vital to this team. So with that, Allison, I will let you take over if you want to unmute and present and take us through it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andrew. Let me just share my screen here. So yes, thank you so much, Andrew, for the introduction. I will be representing the team from the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, and our project proposal is called Turning Pandemics into Gray Rhinos. So I want to start by just defining our terms. What exactly is a gray rhino, and why are we applying it to the space of pandemics? It's a very good question. Well, the term gray rhino is coined by someone named Michelle Wucker. She is the CEO of a crisis management firm, and she really coined the term to serve as an allegory for events that we like to ignore but present really serious implications. And she really says that if we set up the right infrastructure to monitor for these types of events, and we don't turn the blind eye that we sort of like to turn to these types of events, we can actually respond to them much more effectively. So why are we talking about pandemics as gray rhinos? Well, simply put, we're not talking about we're not talking about pandemics as black swans. These are events that we need to anticipate and that we need to respond to much more effectively. So first of all, like Andrew said, we were responding to a very specific problem that we've identified. And that problem is that marginalized communities are suffering a double injustice when it comes to COVID-19. Really, the first injustice has to do with the disproportionate spread among their communities. And this has to do with reasons of overcrowding, poverty, underlying medical issues, a lack of access to testing facilities. And the second injustice is that pandemic response has also failed to account for all the problems that are affecting these communities. So really, they're not having this disproportionate impact that they're feeling met with effective policy strategies. And the reasons for that are sort of threefold. The first is there is a lack of accurate data on transmission rates within these communities. The second is that these communities have particular needs and constraints that are not being considered by public policy response. And finally, it's because of those two reasons that it's very difficult to generate the buy-in that's needed among those communities for these interventions to be successful. So as a result, we're seeing pandemic response that is unequal, unfair, and ineffective. Just some statistics to really demonstrate the magnitude of this issue. In Toronto, racialized people make up 52% of the population, and yet they account for 83% of COVID-19 cases. In Chicago, we see a similar trend where Black residents make up 30% of the population and yet account for 60% of COVID-19 fatalities. If you look at the chart at the bottom of this slide, you'll see similar disproportionate rates of infection and deaths among particular communities in New York City, specifically the Black and African American community, as well as the Hispanic and Latino community. So our solution to this problem is we really need to shift our approach to pandemic response. And this is really where that gray rhino element comes in. What we need to do is set up permanent monitoring infrastructure that is privacy preserving and can give us the insights we need for better policy intervention. This involves sort of a two-part solution. The first is we need to set up wastewater data collection and monitoring within those communities that are being disproportionately affected to have a better sense of how this virus is spreading. And part two is we need to communicate that data that we are obtaining through the use of public-facing dashboards to encourage public engagement and more strategic policymaking. I'm just going to walk you through how this actually works. So part one of our solution is wastewater data collection. If you look at the top left of this chart, you'll see we have the humans here, the people. Essentially, they are going to excrete data into community wastewater. That wastewater is then going to be sampled, prepared in a lab, and analyzed using a multi-class classifier AI algorithm that's able to detect all of the different pathogens that exists and anything else we're really testing for. Finally, that data will be represented back to the community via dashboards. This whole system allows us to collect much more data while preserving anonymity, both features that are not possible by traditional test and trace solutions. So part two of the solution is the use of public dashboards. Our idea is that we are going to leverage local NGOs for two reasons. The first is that we are going to work with them to make sure that these dashboards communicate in culturally sensitive ways, but also to make sure that information that is relevant to those communities that the NGOs are working on themselves can also be incorporated into those dashboards. It could be in the form of forums or surveys or petitions or whatever that might be. So this is really supposed to empower the community to take to be more involved and understand what's happening in their own communities. The second piece of this is we would like to encourage those NGOs to also work with policymakers to contextualize the data that's being received, as well as to provide insights into what makes for a more strategic policy intervention among those communities. We've seen a couple of comparable efforts, mostly involving wastewater monitoring, some of which do also include presenting that wastewater data to a broader community. One of those examples is BioBot Analytics. This is a private sector company. The two other examples we found, one is the Utah Department of Environmental Quality, the other is the city of Tempe in Arizona. We find that these examples are highly reactive as well. They're sort of using ad hoc infrastructure and do not meet this gold standard that we have set for ourselves, which is really that gray rhino standard. So the beauty of this solution is that we can actually use it to detect all sorts of other issues facing these communities, and we can treat them similarly as gray rhinos rather than black swans. We can actually monitor and test for things like E. coli, contaminants in food, opioids, and sugar intake, which we can correlate with diabetes. And finally, we can actually detect the next virus using this type of AI algorithm that we've devised. Thank you so much for listening. These are my teammates and some contact information if you'd like to speak with us further.
Thank you, Allison. Very exciting, and appreciate you taking the time. We'll transition to a Q&A portion now. So we've set aside some time for any questions that you may have, that the audience may have here, and as well, we'll also post this information about the follow-up discussion on the Slack as we go through this. I'll kick off some of the Q&A here, and with just a few questions that we already have, as well as I'll start reading them as they come in. The first one is, maybe you can give a sense as to what you envision a rollout looking like. In other words, like where you'd like to start a deployment and where you'd like to take it after that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we do have a test case idea. So there is a community in Toronto that houses the particularly sort of a cross section of vulnerable or semi-marginalized people, specifically socioeconomically marginalized, and that's in an area called Jane and Finch in Toronto. The idea for rollout in this particular case study would be we would be partnering with the City of Toronto to access the wastewater infrastructure that would allow us to tap into that data source. We would also want to partner with wastewater epidemiologists so that this data can be fed into our AI algorithm. And then we'd really be partnering with NGOs within that community to help us design the UX UI of a dashboard that could be presented back to those communities and really engage with us for a better sense of what a useful and meaningful intervention could be in that locality. And we've identified a particular NGO called Jane and Finch Action Against Poverty, which we think will be quite likely to be interested in partnering with us.
Great.
We also have, I can give you a sense of an overall timeline as well. Just more generally, the idea is we will be positioning ourselves in particular localities that we think there's the most need. We will be wanting our algorithm to reflect the particular makeup of that community's wastewater. So it's gonna be a process of really collecting in the lab the wastewater to feed into our algorithm, to have it adjust its parameters and make it specific to that locality. Then it's really going to be a matter of designing this multi-class classifier to be able to be attuned to what anomalies might look like so that we can have this, the potential to monitor for something that we haven't seen before. And then the idea, again, is to partner with municipalities, connect with local NGOs, and then to launch our dashboard.
Excellent. Since we have a very global audience here, what would be what would be the timing as you expand it to take it outside, or do you have a roadmap, for example, of where to go outside of Canada once you take it there?
That's a great question. So right now we have identified specific localities within Canada that we think might be quite willing to partner us, as well as really great use cases or test cases to get a sense for how we can really build this idea out. That being said, we are noticing countries all over the world are really publicizing those communities that are being disproportionately affected by COVID-19. So we would sort of have that easy entryway by potentially partnering with NGOs that are speaking out against the lack of adequate action that the government's taking to protect those marginalized communities.
So I will encourage those that are on the call that have suggestions as to what those communities might be to reach back out to the team here so they can add it to their roadmap. So thank you for that. Next question came from the audience here. Wouldn't a public-facing dashboard expose communities to certain stigmatization and be counterproductive?
That is an amazing question. There's actually an ethics guideline that we reviewed earlier. So first of all, wastewater-based epidemiology is actually quite ethical in a lot of ways, including its ability to preserve privacy while simultaneously collecting all sorts of data. But you're right in saying that it does present the risk of stigmatizing particular groups. And what we've tried to do to overcome that, and we've sort of taken from best practices in ethics in this space in doing so, is this is really designed mostly as an empowerment tool. It's something that we want to use not only to, yes, expose the problem, but also to be able to leverage local NGOs that are doing things about this problem and empowering the community with all sorts of solutions. But really, the idea is that the magnitude of this problem is already being captured among communities that are able to access testing and all sorts of things. So we're experiencing a big data gap. And the idea is we need to see that gap in order to properly address it. But also we need to represent that gap, as whoever asked this question so aptly pointed out, in ways that are appropriate for the community. It's really designed with an eye to empowerment and more effective response. Really, it's not a matter of embarrassing or stigmatizing these community members. And we're really going to give NGOs a big role in really stewarding this data and communicating this information both to the community and to the public at large. So hopefully that will mitigate the threat of stigmatization.
Okay, thank you. Next question was, is the data that you are collecting from a main pipe or at a household level?
It's from the pipes. We're not going to do it at a household level because it becomes more complicated the closer and closer you get to each individual home. But we are able to narrow it down to particular localities or regions within a city, so that it is quite specific to the population.
And to that end, then, is there some assumption as to when you local governments have access to such data that you then couple it with other forms of testing that might be more specific to one community or another?
Interesting. What do you mean by couple it with other forms of testing?
I think what the question was getting at, in other words, like, use it as a response mechanism to then go do individual COVID testing or something like that based on the results. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And that can be a policy intervention potentially. Maybe we need, more accessible testing in these areas. Of course, that would be sort of a next step based on the data that's being collected, because this in and of itself cannot give people, very specific instructions as to how long they should be quarantining for, or, whether they can leave the house. So yes, the next step would likely be testing and knowing exactly where to situate those testing facilities.
Okay. I think we might have time for one more question here. This last one is, how do you plan to maximize detection in wastewater analysis of other variables in collaboration with public health services to better serve these underserved demographics, i.e. sugar intake concentration as a predictor of obesity/diabetes, therefore a risk group for COVID-19?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is sort of the beauty of this multi-class classifier algorithm, is we're able to classify all of those different sources of information, or all of the different, whether it's another virus, whether it's the intake of contaminants in food, those can all be classified in very efficient ways with the use of AI. The idea is, again, you really want to make sure the algorithm is being trained on the specific data of that locality, so that it can be more attuned to the type of data that it's getting and how it can classify that information going forward.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer, and thank you for the presentation. It's really exciting and so so relevant to what we're all dealing with, of course, here this around the world. So thank you for you and your team, of course, for putting all this great information together. As we said earlier, we'll provide opportunities to further ask questions and collaborate over the Slack workspace that I know you're already doing. So thanks again, Allison.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. So with that, I would like to now, we're going to change over to the gender track. And so I would like to introduce my colleague Haneen on that front, who is to help to facilitate that track. So Haneen, you want to take it from here?
Thank you so much, Andrew. Hi, everyone. My name is Haneen Khalaf. I lead the gender initiatives at XPRIZE Foundation, one of which is aimed at closing gender data gaps. We are actually going to announce something very exciting tomorrow, so I hope you can all join us for that. But today we'll be hearing from one of our gender equity breakthrough teams called Outside International. But first, I wanted to thank the people who got us here. So first, wanted to thank our amazing Gender Equity Brain Trust. They are responsible for planning the direction of this track. I also wanted to thank our gender equity experts who met with not only the teams that you've heard from yesterday and today, but many other amazing potential projects that may be launched soon. So we'll share more information about all of those. But now I'd like to welcome Denise Sosilo from Outside International to join me. Hi. The theme that Outside International's work addresses is how to identify technical ways to define, detect, and evaluate algorithmic gender bias. So we're only going to hear from Denise today, but she has some amazing team members behind the scenes, including Dan McClure, Devangana Kokar, Roberta Pelazzoli, Lucy Goning, and Valerie Fabroni. So Denise, welcome. The floor is all yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. This has been really an amazing experience for us to be able to showcase the work that we hope to implement very soon. My name is Denise Sosilo from Outside International. We are here to present the Complete Picture project. And we are working to construct inclusive and diverse test data sets that show a complete picture of communities for AI bias testing. Imagine you're an AI developer and your job is to decide for people in a community thousands of miles away on issues such as who gets a loan or who gets admitted to training programs or who gets the scarce medical treatment. And for the people of those communities, their futures and even their lives are in your hands and you have to do your job well. But how can your algorithm actually be fair and unbiased if you only see a portion of the people on these streets? So most developers actually only see the digital footprint of a community that is very often biased towards male representation. And so what they do is they extrapolate from what they see to fill in the gaps. But this actually is not the true picture that represents the community's diversity. Often the picture is a lot more complex than that. And so the problem here is that you can't actually test for bias if people don't show up in the data. And this is the problem that we seek to solve with our data sets. So the solution is to build out more complete data sets for these testing purposes. So our project, the Complete Picture project, provides developers and others concerned with AI bias a starting point for testing, which is a complete picture of communities, including the people who are very often not included or otherwise ignored. And this actually matters a lot. In every community now, we see that AI is becoming really important as a tool for decision-making, and this really affects people's lives. So we're seeing this in new border security apps, we're seeing this in education and medical treatments, etc. So this is a large problem. And there are multiple paths in which our data sets would deliver impact at scale, and here are just some of them. One is during the design phase of these algorithms. The data sets can help ensure that early on, when the developers are trying to understand the problem and shape their approach, that inclusivity is built in the process right from the beginning. Also during the development stage, during testing, when checking the algorithm for hidden and unexpected bias before adopting the tool. And also, even if some algorithms have already been adopted, UN actors or development actors, they can use these data sets to assess adoption for communities that were not part of the original design of these algorithms. And this is probably a quite common use case. So we are looking at implementing an agile approach to building these data sets. starting with foundational data sets where we plan to draw on open source data sets mainly and statistical data. And through user research and testing, iterate and improve these data sets. And then later on, hopefully we'll be able to draw on private data sets to reach enhanced data sets that can be used for this purpose. We're looking at initially at a 3-month implementation sprint where we want to develop this first data set with a partner. The outcome will be a presentation of the tool and the methodology, and this is of course then the first stepping stone towards a larger towards building a larger data set that we will iterate on going forward. We're sustainable in that during the first pilot, we're hoping to develop this methodology, develop the initial data sets, and cultivate a network of collaborators. We do want to share the methodologies and tools with the ecosystem to enable other providers to contribute to these data sets. And in the long term, this should help expand access to non-public data sets and also an expanded user network that can contribute to these open data sets for testing purposes. Our team is interdisciplinary. We hail from also all over the world. We're based in South Africa, the United States, Europe, and India. And of course, we have the data science expertise, but also people that work on complex systems innovation, gender and development, and services innovation. We all have experience and work in the humanitarian and development field. So I think this, in this way, we really know the sector quite well. And yes, if this approach, if you feel inspired by anything that you've heard, we would love to get in touch and meet other projects. Especially we'd like to connect to projects that can help us connect to use cases that support the SDGs. But also we'd love to have an open exchange on how to build further synergies and tools around this approach. My email address is here in the slides, but you can also find me on LinkedIn, and we're also on Slack. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you for sharing this amazing project. So we now have an opportunity to ask Denise questions about the project. So if you have any, and if you haven't already done so, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit any questions you have for Denise and team. But I will get us started. So since we have this slide up, would you be willing to just kind of give some more details about some of the ways that you're seeking support around the use cases and partnerships, and just can you give us some more details around that, please?
Sure. We are a relatively young project, but we've started to initiate some of these partnerships, especially with academic institutions already. We are looking at sort of the right partner to have this initial sprint with. It should be a partner that we can grow with because we're looking for an open exchange. And ideally, this should be a project that's focused on SDGs, improving outcomes towards the SDGs, of course, around gender if possible. And yeah, we're looking for a partner that has potential pilot projects in physical communities that are sort of bound geographically that we can start to work with. On top of that, we are looking for sponsors, people that are excited about this approach and would like to support this ecosystems and the partnership that we're building. And this is probably a critical part to really get us started. And then always we're interested to talk to people who have ideas about how to share data sustainably. I think we've heard about a lot of really good initiatives, and yeah, any suggestions on how we can further build synergies and tools. We're really excited to have these discussions.
Amazing. It sounds like there are a lot of ways that people can get involved, so we'll be sure to share your contact information. Can you tell us a little bit more about, the potential impact of this project on the AI community, and just, is it global? Is it local? How do you envision that playing out?
Yeah, we have probably a bit, the vision is ambitious, even though the first implementation, we're trying to take a slice that we can chew on. But we see the impact really around building this ecosystem in the long term and creating more awareness about some of the data issues that we're facing, building a collaborator network. And I mean, we've had discussions with regulators, and they had been really excited about the potential to have more oversight downstream in the process. And that's where we can actually use these data sets also for validation testing of pre-trained algorithms. And I mentioned it briefly, this is very often the case when development actors, UN agencies are adopting technology. It might have been designed for a different context. And this should be a tool to help us, at the very least, reduce harm, if not extend on the positive impact that it can have by reaching the right people.
Great, thank you so much. So we have a question from the crowd just asking, what kind of data must be used to reduce biased models? And if you can get more specific about the types of data that you're looking for.
Yeah, sure. So we as a project, we are data agnostic, and I think we need to be, because models are, use all types of data nowadays. But we're really looking at, in the beginning, to access public data sets. Very often projects might have built their models around data sets, but these data sets could be expanded with other available data. So finding these relevant community data sets will be really important. We have to get creative probably in the process and combine different sources. Make unstructured data usable, and improve this process really through user research and consultation with the community. And this almost might go into a bit of sort of anthropological work to find out really what are the needs and what are the interlinkages. And then we can validate this data with statistical and analytical studies. And eventually, in the long term, we'd like to negotiate safe access to private data sets. So yeah, I think the key here is that we have to be creative and look for the different ways in which we can expand these data sets.
Great, thank you. And did you mention like the types of the groups of people or regions that you're looking to first implement the data collection within? Sorry if we missed that.
Yeah, but I'm happy to repeat this because this is important. So we're looking to, we're already discussing with partners actually, but ideally, so this first pilot implementation will focus on physical communities. And in terms of impact, we're looking so at a project that's working on SDGs. It could be anything. It could be sort of making investment decisions, algorithms that help sort of determine needs for investments. I think there we're quite flexible still.
Great. And then we have another question from the crowd. So what do you mean by practical practices to identify and reduce AI bias? And any measurement you'd use to assess practicality level of chosen practices for transparency and replication purposes?
I started with the first question, and I might ask you to repeat the second question.
Sure, no problem.
Do you want to do that now so I can think of it also?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So the first question, what do you mean by practical practices to identify and reduce AI bias? And then the second was, and any measurement you'd use to assess practicality level of chosen practices for transparency and replication purposes?
Yeah. Okay. So if it hasn't come through, we are a project that's ready to implement. So in that sense, we're not trying to sort of develop new guidelines. We're really trying to really start to work on these data sets right away in this first phase. And we see these tools as actually a practical way to know more about biases that might be part of the models that we're using currently. So in that sense, that's why we're saying practical. On the second part, this is something that we have to develop in more detail through this first implementation stage. I think as we start to work on this, we'll learn a lot more about how we can make sure that we are that we're being safe, that we don't introduce new risks to the communities that we're working with, and then working closely with this partner, understand how we can share these tools then also more widely. And this is also part of the partnerships that we're seeking, especially in academia. There are really great projects that are already looking at how, what are some of the good means in which we can build these data sets and make sure that we reduce bias in them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Denise. And this ties in perfectly to an announcement that we're making tomorrow about a project that this would fit perfectly into. So we're excited to continue the work with you. And thank you so much for sharing all of this amazing information. If anyone would like to reach out to Denise or the Outside International team, we always have the Slack channel available. And if you have any resources that you'd like to contribute, or if you'd like to collaborate, become a partner, please reach out to them. And thank you so much, Denise, for being with us today.
Thank you so much again.
Thanks. And now I'm going to hand it over to my wonderful colleague, Caroline Kolta, who will introduce us to our next team. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Haneen. And as Haneen mentioned, I'm Caroline Kolta. I'm a product manager at the X Prize Foundation, and I've had the pleasure of working on food prizes since I joined a couple of years ago. X Prize has been working in the food and ag space since then. This October actually marks 1 year after we published the Future Food Impact Roadmap. It's a research project and a report exploring necessary breakthroughs to transform food systems for the better. And I will insert a link in the chat if you'd like to check that product out, that report. And today, I'm honored to be introducing the Future Food Breakthrough team, who will be presenting Project Farm. But first, as Haneen and Andrew did, I would also like to thank our incredible team of Brain Trust members who supported this work since the start and helped us select some of the teams that you heard from yesterday and today. And I would also like to extend thanks to an incredible team of experts who worked with the teams and mentored them from all over the world. So thank you, Brain Trusts and experts, for giving us your time to see the needle moved in this space of food and agriculture. And now, without further ado, I would like to welcome up Marion Marcus from Project Farm. He'll be presenting about his project today. And the theme that the project is trying to tackle is how we might use AI to design resilient food systems that can better anticipate, adapt, and/or mitigate system shocks. And although Marion is the only one from his team presenting, I also wanted to mention other team members working with him who helped make this work a reality, including Julian Van Veltzen, Mangarish Herwatkar, Luke Bardman, and Renee Walters. And with that, I would love to hand it over to Marion to take it from here. If you can share your screen and unmute yourself, Marion, so everyone can see.
Could somebody turn my video on, please?
Let me check how we can do that.
There we go.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good day, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, and evening. My name is Marion Marcus, and I'm honored to present to you our Project Farm, where we strive to change the lives of smallholder farmers around the world with big data. Now, our world faces a production paradox. The population is set to grow to 10 billion people in just 30 years. We will need to feed more people using less resources. Now, did you know that 70% of the food produced worldwide comes from smallholder farmers, not giant farms with drones and self-driving tractors, but lands no bigger than a football field. They feed 70% of the world, yet earn barely enough to sustain their own families due to increased pressures on land, volatile markets, and low efficiency. It's these farmers that we want to help. Now, we are many things: data scientists, strategists, but we are not farmers, nor do we pretend to be. But we have an idea and we have data. So we sought contact with local actors like Agrix, an NGO in Kenya. They are connected to local smallholder farmers, aiding them with training, credit. We are not reinventing the wheel here, no. We build upon existing networks in a partnership approach, and through it, we give smallholder farmers access to the Farm AI platform. Farmers connect the farm with the one device everyone has in the world, a mobile phone capable of receiving SMS text messages. Their individually owned data is combined with satellite and market information to generate insights, like predicting yield, to estimate what your harvest is going to be end of season, credit risk assessment, and many others. Additionally, farmers can access bookkeeping, training material provided by our partners. Now, this sounds fancy, but let me just show you what it looks like. This is the farm platform version 1.0. And over here we have Kenya. Let's see, let's zoom in on a random farmer over here. Let's grab this guy. In the village of Maturu. Sorry if I got that wrong. Now we have here a picture of their soil. Using machine learning, we identify the quality of the soil. Then we cross-reference with weather data, satellite imagery, and historic data to give this farmer a prediction what his yield will be end of season, not in kilograms, but in bags of maize, based on a picture he took of his farm. Simultaneously, at scale, we give credit risk assessment to local actors so they can spread their risk and not go bankrupt because they went all in on one region. And now we're expanding the platform with parameter recognition and flood warnings. With Farm, users can improve their harvest, accelerate entrepreneurship, and create transparency in the value chain. I could talk for hours about this, but I'd rather let you hear it from an actual farm user.
Mimi kama mkulima wa Agrix, ningependa kuwa nikipata ujumbe kutoka kwa simu, ili niwe nikifahamu vile naweza fanya kazi yangu ya shamba na kuendeleza hali ya miradi yangu ya shamba. Ili mafuno yamekuwa mingi, na mbele nilikuwa napata kunia 3 kwa nusu eka, na sasa hii nusu eka napata makunia 14. Nitakuwa nikiuza ile ya faida ya juu, nikiuza nasomesha watoto, nifanye miradi ya kununua ng'ombe, ama hata nyumba sina, nipanue kanyumba ya mawe hapa.
This man increased his earnings, bought a cow, and sent his kids to school because of stuff we do with data. This is where Farm has impact. This is where we can use AI for good. This is where we want to be. Now we want to grow Farm in 4 phases. After the trial in Kenya, we are now collaborating with local parties in Zimbabwe and India, where we're training a full team to scale and continue to grow our ecosystem. And through it, we aim to reach 10 million smallholders. We have found ways to help farmers produce more and improve their livelihood. And now we seek partners to bring these gains to the international commercial market, to aid smallholder farmers worldwide. So we have 2 questions for you. We are looking for both local partners to help extend the reach of Farm, and global partners in tech and in retail to translate local gains to global success. And if you think you can help us find answers to these questions, please reach out to us. We are here to help smallholder farmers with big data. We are Project Farm. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the presentation and for the live view of how your system works. It was really interesting to see. As we get more questions in the chat and in the Q&A section of the Zoom, I'd like to start us off with one of the things we heard yesterday during the keynote presentation about inclusion in AI. And similarly, today we talked about moral and ethical implications of AI in Yoshua's presentation. And I wonder how your project ensures relevant voices are heard and incorporated into your technology.
Very, very fair question. We get this one a lot. The specific answer to this would be, this is why we're working with local partners. We are not farmers, nor should we pretend to know everything about farming. That's what they do. We do the data stuff, the technology stuff, and thereby aid not just the individual farmer, but also the other actors, the creditors, the market people in that value chain. And it's only by collaborating with all those partners and sharing information that we can ensure that we do it right. The more general answer to it would be, there is also always a risk in AI that an answer might be wrong. Like, I do crime prediction and refugee research beside this. But the position where it can go wrong is also the only position where it can go right. And with great power comes great responsibility. So it's the only place from where you can make an impact. And we need to be aware of that.
Thank you for that. And we actually had a question come in following up on the maybe inaccuracies that could come up. So the question is, how confident are you in that the AI is accurate, and what happens if some predictions are wrong?
Well, once again, these are predictions and recommendations on what the farmers should do. They can be wrong, but if I may use Kenya as an example, the local party in Kenya had 10 people on scooters driving around the country, giving training and advice to farmers. And they had over 40,000 farmers in the network. And what we did was basically automate part of those recommendations. So suddenly you can reach a whole lot more farmers than 10 people on scooters can, because Kenya's big. And that is a part of the answer to the question, because suddenly you can give recommendations to more people. And yes, they are not foolproof. We reached like 85% accuracy, I believe. Some were wrong, but it was better than no recommendation at all, because that is the current situation, or the situation before.
Great. And we had a couple other questions about the recommendations. And one of them is from South America. A big problem that they see there is that some farmers grow drugs to maximize income. And what they're asking is, how do you encourage farmers to grow other crops and show them that it's lucrative financially to do so?
Yeah, well, one of the issues is indeed only growing a single crop on a piece of land, which is not good for the land. So you actually also want to advise on circulating. You're doing grains, then you're doing maize and stuff. But on a wider scale, smallholder farmers in general suffer from the fact that many of them don't earn enough farming, so they might choose other sources of revenue, which could be growing drugs, or just quitting farming altogether and becoming Uber drivers, which leads us to a larger problem, which is that, once again, 70% of the food production in the world, especially Africa and South America, is dependent on smallholder farmers, and they are being driven out of smallholder farming. So yes, crop circulation is very important, but this is actually a bigger problem than just circulating crops. This is about different sources of income and how we should improve the position of smallholder farmers compared to other sources of income.
Great. And one last question that came in through the chat is also touching on something you mentioned with monocropping, for example. how do you ensure through your data, through your insights, respect to the environment, for example, endangered species specifically? And so how does your technology account for these environmental balances with your recommendations to farmers?
With regard to the satellite imagery, that's one of the features we're working on, not only to detect floods, but also, for example, locust swarms. I can't say much specific about endangered animal species because I'm not the expert on that. But these are often local phenomena. And this is once again why we're collaborating with local partners in each country where farm lands. Because like, I don't know if locusts are a thing in Zimbabwe or in India. This is what we need to hear from the experts, and thereby we can take it into account. And this is why the partnerships are so important.
Great, which is a great segue to, we're getting a lot of questions for you. So it's a great segue to maybe the last question on this project about the partnerships and how you work. So the questions came around, I lumped them together and address them as you'd like. How do you finance your project? What kind of data do you need? Where do you work? What type of partners do you seek to have maximum impact? So I tried to lump a bunch together, and they're mostly about your operations. So please feel free to take them as you see fit.
Well, the easy answer to that, all those questions is please reach out to us. Let's talk. The short answer is that we started out as folks on a hackathon who wanted to do some good, and then we had a good idea. Now we're building up partnerships left and right, and we also run farm based on those partnerships. So not only local partnerships, but on the global level with technology partners who can help us host stuff, retail partners who can help us reach new networks, both on the ground and on the global level. We are under the parenthood of Capgemini currently, but aiming to break free.
All right.
And big global food corporations like Unilever and Danone. I know you're in the public listening. We would love to talk. Awesome.
So thank you for that, Marion. Again, a lot of interest in the project from the Q&A and the chat. So please, people in the audience, reach out to Marion and his team on Slack. We have a working space set up for them. If you have any resources you'd like to contribute, or if you'd like to collaborate with them or have more questions, they'll be happy to answer them. And with that, it's a time to hand it over back to Andrew, who will introduce the final COVID-19 pandemics team. So Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. As Caroline said, yes, we're heading back to the pandemics track, and I'll introduce the last, but certainly not least, of the projects on this track. The project we're going to talk about today is Intelligent Global Health, which will be presented by Marianne Hartley. This project was submitted according to the theme, how we can create predictive models that support informed policymaking and mitigation of improper resource allocation during a pandemic. And of course, as with these others projects, they're a group effort. So you will get to see and hear Marianne shortly here, but I do want to give some credit as well to her team members, which include Prakhar Gupta, Terry Bossi, Lucas Massaman, Kamia Hemateriad, Andrea Pinto, and Professor Martin Jaggi. Marianne, I will hand it over to you if you want to present and unmute, and I'll give you the floor.
Sure, great. Is it all working? Screen's up? We're good?
Looks good.
Okay. So, hi everyone. Thank you very much for sticking around. My name is Annie, and I'm presenting the What If Global COVID Policy Simulator on behalf of my research group at the EPFL in Switzerland called Intelligent Global Health, where we aim to simulate mistakes rather than make them. So this actually started back during the Ebola epidemic, where I was volunteering in West Africa making some predictive models. And I left very frustrated, watching people protest very legitimately against mitigation policies which were well-intentioned, but inappropriately targeted or badly timed. And so it was there I appreciated the importance of implementing the right policy at the right time, in the right place. And so when COVID-19 came around, we launched a challenge to find this optimal personalized policy mix. And we recruited a multidisciplinary team of scientists who have been working on this project from all over the world since early March. In a sentence, we make predictive models that inform data-driven policymaking and targeted resource allocation. The issue this addresses is a lack of evidence and transparency in policymaking. It's kind of the trade-off a policy makes between competing interests. And this opaque decision-making can seem, or rather be, arbitrary, leading to public mistrust and then public non-compliance, ultimately rendering policies ineffective, costing both money and lives. But to be fair, these decisions are very difficult to make, based on messy and missing data and fuzzy concepts that are difficult to quantify, such as social behaviors and attitudes. So to facilitate these decisions, we present What If? It's a policy simulator using artificial intelligence to build data-driven, personalized predictions on, first, how your data reacts to changes in policies, and to find that optimal policy mix tailored again to your specific situation. Our base model is currently working on data from 93 countries, where we take the types of policy implemented, their timing, duration, and level of stringency. And then we combine them with large data sets of country-specific variables in a deep learning model that predicts pandemic trends. So for instance, in Switzerland, we get this example where our predictions in orange match very closely the real level of transmission here in blue. And this even works in countries as disparate as my home country of South Africa, where we certainly had very different policies implemented and very different levels of compliance. So we want to give these models a home where they can be accessed by the public and policymakers on a web interface. It would work something like this, where you could basically select your country or make a hypothetical one, and then transparently define what it is you are optimizing. Perhaps you are minimizing deaths for a maximum budget. And then you can sit back and ask the question, well, what if? What if, for instance, lockdown was implemented just a little bit earlier, like here? Then you can see how your data would react, for instance, alongside some tangible impact factors and a common sense score based on what it is you are optimizing. And you can actually go and find that optimal policy mix using reinforcement learning, where you can see the policies implemented at the right time and in the right place. And after COVID, well, you can kind of plug in anything. As long as the data exists, it can be applied to other outcomes for other evidence-based policymaking. So in summary, we facilitate this real-time data-driven decision-making, and this creates transparency. It kind of acts like a communication tool between policymakers and the public, right? And when you can understand something, you tend to trust it. And this is bolstered by our academic approach of basically making it open source and open access, and having peer review and expert consensus. And when you trust something, you tend to adhere to it. And we hope that this also minimizes costs and lives lost. So for a timeline, we need to take our base models that are already working and incorporate them into a web interface, which is currently under development. And then we need to refine them with your expert validation and public review before we can launch it live and scale to represent more granular and neglected geographies. Now, this is actually a very important concept, because indeed we can actually use COVID as a unique opportunity to identify those neglected geographies so this doesn't happen again, to fill in those data dark zones, to build more representative, collaborative models. Less than 1% of the world's medical publications come from Africa, making them particularly vulnerable to wasting their already limited resources on poorly targeted policies. So we ask you to help us build a rural collaborative that generates sustainable, representative expertise in resource-limited settings through academic exchange. where, for instance, just $5,000 can represent a new community in data for a specific question, or a new career in data science. And for each million, over 100 new independent experts can be guided and supported through one of our lab at one of the top 10 universities in the world. So we call on you. We need, first of all, for this platform of What If, we need multidisciplinary experts to train and validate our models. And we need partnerships with policymakers and academia in resource-limited settings. And more importantly, we need data on a more granular geographic scale. And when that data can't really be trusted, some pandemic indicators, well, we need proxies to triangulate the right value. And we also finally need resources for this rural collaborative to build representative, collaborative models through academic exchange so that we can find the right policy at the right time in the right place to respond to this pandemic and also prepare for the next one. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie. This is fantastic and so spot on for what I'm sure everybody is looking for right now in dealing with the pandemic. So, of course, we're opening up the floor to questions. I will seed it with a first few here and then start answering them, asking them as they come in. So you talk about you're already, of course, in a number of, you've got data and operated across a number of different nations and communities and what have you, I think 93. Any words of advice or guidance for if you've got either a new community or a new country that you're not currently engaged with? How do you onboard that? And what should they prepare to need to help you get so that you could apply this tool to that market?
Yeah, so basically right now we're using centralized repositories of data, and obviously open source ones. We really want to open up the code so that it's accessible and can be validated by outside participants, right? So in countries that we kind of have to exclude, it's because they don't have, for instance, reliable reporting. Some countries have stopped reporting their data reliably or at all, and some of them just don't have any testing. So we want to deliver relative insights for the data that is collected. So we don't claim, okay, this is absolutely correct for what's on the ground, but we say what data you do give us, we can try to explain to you how that would react to changes in policies. But we want to get as accurately as possible. That's why we're asking for these proxies of data, right? So if, for instance, there are some clinical trials or studies that are going on that can predict the prevalence of COVID or other diseases, of course, but for COVID, to predict the prevalence of it through antibody testing, etc., and give a kinetic as well, it will allow us to feed this data into a time-based model, such as what we're using at the moment. So proxies of how many people were really infected, so we can improve the quality of the data in countries that are a bit patchy, and also kind of opinions about how much people trust the data that's being reported. I think that's very important. We've excluded things because we make kind of high-level decisions on this is probably so incorrect that I'm not going to even dare look at it. But if we can rather understand the data and understand the uncertainty behind the data that's being given to us, we can also report that uncertainty with confidence intervals and make it more transparent so people can understand the data that is reported and they can look at it with a bit of circumspect.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question that came in is, are you already working with any policymakers as a way in which to validate the solution and the approach?
That's exactly why we're here. So the thing is, we could, in the most simple format, I mean, we're a group of scientists from all over the world working through this group at EPFL, and we could just go, okay, well, great, we've got this model, let's put it in a website and launch it and then see who likes it. And that's not what we want to do. We want to make it inclusive. We want to make sure that policymakers can be involved in the design process and that they can have buy-in. We want to make sure that they can use it for themselves and be okay that other people can, it makes them more transparent. It makes them, try to kind of have to declare what it is they are optimizing against. And that's what we're here for. We want to reach out in this kind of like, it's a perfect forum for this, right? It's, with the ITU, there's a lot of people that are connected with these networks of policymakers. So either in a centralized place where you've got a person who's like basically representing a few regions and can give us insights about, you see this trend, but I can help you interpret that trend so that we can also communicate that and feed our models with this kind of on the ground advice. So at the moment, our models work and they can interpret relative changes in data, but we want to make them more interpretable and to learn on the go from incoming data and incoming interpretability.
Okay, so I think the message to the crowd here is you're interested, especially as you do those first levels of validation in establishing a proof of concept pilot, what have you, with some policymakers by which you could, of course, get the word out about what you're doing, but also validate the solution itself, right? So for anybody that might be able to help in that, please connect. Next question. Given the fact that pandemics often present unknown symptoms and variables, how does your policy planner make sure it doesn't look more expert than it is at the start of the disease with a previously unknown dynamic?
So if it's kind of like giving false advice, is that what you're saying? Like kind of doesn't look like it's, that's the whole thing. I think that the risk of rubbish in, rubbish out is very important. It's a risk for all AI, all models everywhere, right? So you want to make sure that you've got good data and that you don't just go and start a model on data that's not representative of a certain situation, a certain scenario. You have to have a certain level of stability before you say, okay, well, now that I'm kind of sure that there's a trend that makes physiological sense, I'm not going to report an R value, which happens right in the beginning. You have your models, you start on day one. And if you only use day one, then you've got like an R value that is 17.9. It's not possible. So we do limit our models to physiological bounds of transmission, which is very important. And it's such an important question because if I understood it also correctly as well, because interpretability is very important. We do not say this is the answer, this is how many people are infected. That's what these SEIR models are doing, these are kind of prediction models that are predicting into the future using crystal balls and a bit of math, which we need. But those models have got a risk as well attached to them, where they say, well, I'm using the data now and I'm projecting into the future and extrapolating. Whereas we are rather saying, make your hypothetical situation with the data that we do have and see how, according to relationships between your data and your policy, how it would have worked, so that you can assess your performance and you can learn from mistakes and try to, when you reach that same situation again, respond better.
Okay, thank you. Next question was referring to your roadmap. The first milestone is expert validation. Any sense of timing as to when that might be? And I guess maybe we can, my own add to that, maybe we can call out to the community as to what you'd want those experts to be.
Yeah, so it's very important that we've got, first of all, the one thing we're really missing in our group, we're very multidisciplinary here, but the thing we're really missing is, I can actually stop sharing the screen. So the thing we're really missing is economists. I would say that is one of the biggest things, because we're making a trade-off between two things. So, I'm a medical doctor or epidemiologist, and we've got like digital socio-epidemiologists, but we're really missing what we're trading off against. So we don't want to make we don't want to reinvent the wheel either. So we want to use existing data. We want to use existing knowledge, existing models that predict secondary costs. This is secondary costs not only in money, but it's health economists. So it's like, how much does a policy cost in lives? Because you do get non-COVID deaths when you implement some policies, right? Access to healthcare is blocked, for instance. People have mental health diseases. People might even commit suicide. They might decide not to go to the hospital because they're too scared and then die of heart attacks. These secondary losses because of you're implementing a policy should be taken into consideration in the trade-off, as should livelihoods. And maximizing kind of safety against COVID might actually kill people or destroy their livelihoods. So being too stringent can cost, and it's all about optimizing. Yeah, so we need economists, health economists especially, but we'd also need people who can give us some access to really nice data sets that we can understand the nuances of, a policymaker might implement a policy and they might think they're implementing it, but the real people implementing it is obviously the public. So how do they respond? Is it acceptable to them? A policy that is restricting access to religious human rights may be more important in one place than in another. And so you don't just want to optimize a policy based on money and cost. You want to optimize it based on acceptability, cultural norms. And so this kind of sociology part, so if we go from the health economist part to calculate the direct and secondary costs of a policy, and then on the other side, we also want sociologists to kind of help nuance our optimizers so that we can have, first of all, like maybe some, for instance, surveys on how people are, how they find it acceptable or not, or if, for instance, they adhere to policies more in one place than in another. And so you can better target your policies on a more granular level.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I think you've given the community here a lot of options as to ways in which they could potentially collaborate with you. And thank you for sharing with us this project. I think we're about out of time, but of course, we will, for all of these projects, I want to first off thank everybody for all of the teams for presenting across all of the tracks. As we've said before, we have Slack as a means of connecting up on these projects, reaching out to them, getting further questions answered and clarifications. So we will continue to do that. If we could post into the chat here as well, a reminder as to what those, that's how to sign up for that Slack workspace. And so now I think we're about at the close of this portion of today. I want to remind everybody on not only connecting, I can see the Slack has been posted, but also any way you can support these projects, because they're all quite compelling, and I think they can all have a great impact in the immediate term. So I encourage everybody to do that. We do have one more day left, which we've got some great keynotes and some very interesting announcements. You've gotten a little taste of what some of those might be related to tomorrow. So I do encourage everybody to come back and to hear from us and what we have kind of coming down the pipe here. And with that, I'll hand it back to Ahmed at ITU and let him close us out.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's been great, and great job moderating. Also with Haneen and Caroline, all the project of the 3 workshop tracks of the gender, food, and collective pandemic intelligence. And of course, excellent job for Amir and Gabrielle for moderating the keynote. And thanks to the 3 projects and the presenters and to Professor Yoshua Bengio. And before we close, I would like to remind you all that tomorrow we're going to have a great day. You can start at 8 a.m. Pacific time, which is 5 p.m. Geneva time. And it's going to be starting with a great keynote by Peter Diamandis, the founder and executive chairman of XPRIZE and co-founder and executive chairman of Singularity University. And it's going to be a keynote with the title, Building a World of Abundance with AI for Good. It's going to, following this, we're going to have some really interesting surprise announcements. So we're going to leave this for tomorrow. And we're going to close the day with a virtual magic show. We're going to have renowned magician, Simon Piero. We're going to have a virtual magic show with the title, Blurring the Lines Between Emerging Technology and Magic. So please make sure you go to our website, aiforgood.itu.int, to register for tomorrow's session. And with this, I would like to thank all our sponsors, partners, and of course, XPRIZE for putting this all together. And very special thanks to our co-convener, Switzerland. And I hope you're going to have a good day, afternoon, or evening. Thank you very much.
Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector.